Greetings. It is a joy to be with you in this virtual space. Our church community welcomes you whether you are new or a longtime member. We especially want to welcome those who are here with us for the very first time. If you would like to learn more about our community and its online offerings, please go to nsuc.org and sign up for our newsletter. There has never been a better time to get involved or to become a member of the North Shore Unitarian Church. We would love to get you connected, and we welcome you today. Let's now begin our worship with music.
Good morning. It is a blessing to be with you on this, the first day of spring. I will invite us into worship now with the words of Laura Wallace. As frozen earth holds the determined seed, this sacred space holds our weariness, our sorrow, our laughter, and our celebration. Let us bring seed and soul into the light of thought, the warmth of community, and the hope of love. Let us see together, hear together, love together. Let us worship.
My spiritual companions, welcome to this day. Let us light our flame together. This flame affirms the light of truth, the warmth of community, and the fire of commitment.
Good morning. Today's story is called Growing Rocks. My grandparents live in Cervantes, a small town in central Illinois. One of the things that I missed this past year was the opportunity to spend time with them in their large garden. If you've ever dreamed of having 40 tomato plants, fruit trees, and row after row of flowers, I think it's your kind of place. One of the interesting things about their garden is the perennial appearance of pottery shards in the soil. Not just a few pottery shards, but thousands of pottery shards. You see, a large commercial greenhouse once occupied the land where their garden is located. The shards that turn up every year are from pottery that were destroyed when the greenhouse was knocked down. The funny thing about the shards is that they come up year after year in the soil and must be moved to keep the plants in a neat row. Maybe you experienced something similar in your garden. Not the emergence of shards, perhaps, but rocks. Do rocks pop up in your garden each spring? Does it seem like your garden grows rocks no matter what you do? Have you ever wondered what was going on? What actually happens is that there are rocks and moisture deep in the soil. Over the winter, the water freezes and the rocks get pushed up by the ice. Every spring, when we tend the garden, we find new rocks, even though we took all the rocks out last year. This can be frustrating unless we can accept that life has cycles and seasons. We will indeed always have to address new challenges, even as we build skills and develop strategies to better manage them. So I invite you to embrace the rocks that you might find in your life right now. Instead of thinking them as an annoyance, pick them up, study them, and welcome them like an old friend returning from long ago. Be well, my friends.
North Shore Unitarian Church is a community that is grounded in love, guided by reason, committed to spiritual growth, and striving for justice. We accomplish this mission through the generous donation of our members and friends. And so we invite you to text your donation now. Please note that in order to give, you must include NSUC and the amount. Thank you for your generosity.
This week, on Tuesday, America experienced yet another act of racially and this time sexually motivated violence, as two separate but related shootings took place in Atlanta, Georgia. Please join me as we hold the names of the victims in our hearts this morning. Hyun-Chung Kim, 51. Zhao Jae-tan, 49. Delana Ashley Young, 33. Paul Andre Michaels, 54. Jiao Yong Feng, 44. Soon Chung Park, 74. Soon Cha Kim, 69. Young Ai Yu, 63. And Elcias Hernandez Ortiz, 30, who was critically injured. May those who knew and loved the victims find comfort and peace in their memory. May those injured in body and or spirit be restored to health and wholeness. And may we all continue the work of justice. Amen. May it be so. Blessed be.
If I planted a garden, if I carefully sowed, if I nourished each tiny seed, if I tended it well and helped it to grow, what a beautiful harvest I'd reap. My life like a garden, there are seeds to be sown, if I choose with the greatest care, planting only what's good, so I can be sure only beautiful things will grow there. Planting a garden every day of our lives, and the harvest is ours to keep. If we plant seeds of justice, of honor and truth, what a beautiful harvest we'll
Wholly Ambivalent by Kathleen McTeague. The year I turned 30 was a tricky one for me. I was unsettled in all the largest areas of my life: vocation, location, and relationship. Decisions loomed, each one feeling huge, portentous, and muddled with the other choices facing me. In the midst of this decision-making turmoil and angst, I took a trip to southern Mexico, where I spent some time in the little town of San Cristobal. I was drawn to the town's old churches, where I felt comfort and a sense of holiness, simply because they held within their walls centuries of human longing and hope. One morning, I walked into my favorite of these churches and sat in the front pew, breathing the musty peace of the place. The ornate altar was full of candles, each one lit by someone's hope or yearning. Then a dozen people entered, local men and women who wore the beautiful, bright woven clothes of that area. They were led by an older man, dressed in white, and they all came to the altar and knelt on the stone floor in front of me. I watched as the leader made supplications and prayed for 15 minutes, not in the Spanish I know, but an indigenous tongue I couldn't fathom. After a short, expectant silence, he turned and took the wrist of the woman sitting next to him. He bowed his head for a moment, then looked into her face and began to speak quietly, only to her. One by one, he did the same thing for each person in the group. Took a wrist, bowed tenderly over it in silence, and then spoke with quiet certainty, each person listening intently, nodding. It dawned on me that this man was a diviner, and that he held each person's wrist with his thumb on the pulse point. After listening to the secrets of their hearts, he looked into each face with authority and wisdom and spoke the truth he discerned. As I watched this ceremony and the kind face of this man, from out of my private fog of doubt and indecision, I found myself filled with yearning. I wanted nothing in the world more than to have him cradle my wrist in his hand and bow his head to listen with his inner ear for the direction my life ought to take. Then he would turn those eyes on me and, speaking in a language I could understand, say, "This is what you ought to do." I would listen and nod, everything suddenly clear, and then I'd be on my way, free of doubt. But it didn't happen. The holy man never caught my eye, and I didn't try to cross the barriers of language, culture, and belief to ask him to listen to my beating heart. Instead, I walked back out into the flat, hot sunlight and the practical streets of San Cristobal, full of ordinary people dealing with life's unknowns and making their choices. Eventually, through the course of time and struggle, I made the decisions that faced me then and went on to the next ones and the next. We all come to some decision points when every option seems ambiguous and we don't have a clue which way to go. We arrive at a turn in the road that we can't see around until we take the next steps forward. And we take those steps not knowing whether we've made the right choice. We continue on a wing and a prayer, but sometimes if we can be still, if we can stop our anxious dithering and wait quietly, we'll hear our heart's wisdom. It's beating there at the pulse point, waiting for us to listen.
When my children were very young, we as a family planted a large vegetable garden every year. It was important to my husband and I that our children learned that food doesn't just come from the grocery store. Every spring, we would rent a tiller and break up the soil and, of course, remove all the rocks that rose up to the surface during the winter. We would build up the beds and plant our crops, making sure that each variety was sown with companion plants so that they could support one another throughout the growing season. While my kids enjoyed the planting and the harvesting, they were not big fans of the weeding, the mulching, or the waiting. They especially enjoyed choosing what we would plant each year. Being spaghetti enthusiasts, they wanted to plant tomatoes. The thought of homegrown jack-o'-lanterns led to sowing pumpkins. They didn't see why we should take precious garden space to grow jalapenos when only the grown-ups were going to eat those. And they were disappointed to learn that you can't actually grow marshmallows in the garden. In pagan cultures throughout time and among neo-pagan practitioners today, the theology around the spring equinox traditionally points to the comparison of planting a garden, or at least planning a garden, and discernment. What will we choose to plant in our lives? What values will we cultivate? What actions will we take that will nourish us through the weeks and months to come? And of course, due to limited space in our spiritual gardens, we question what weeds we will need to pull, what practices and ideas no longer serve us, what, if not removed, will steal the energy and nutrients needed for our desired seedlings to bloom. Discernment is the act of faithful decision-making. It is more than just deciding with our rational minds. Discernment asks us to ground into our values and guiding principles. It asks us to listen to the wisdom in our bodies, our minds, and our spirits. and it challenges us to make our choices with relationships in mind, to consider our communities of accountability. Discernment practices, of course, are not limited just to pagan traditions. Spiritual traditions throughout time and around the world incorporate various forms of individual and collaborative discernment. Some traditions look for answers in their scriptures. Others encourage time spent in prayer and meditation. Many use formal rites of divination, and almost all encourage working with a spiritual mentor or a small faith community to bring in fresh ideas. One such practice was developed by Inigo López de Oñas y Loyola, a young Basque nobleman. At the age of 18, Inigo joined the military, and being a soldier became both his occupation and his identity. That is, until in 1521, he was hit by a cannonball, shattering his leg. He was sent back to his family's castle for medical attention. There he underwent multiple surgeries, having his leg set and rebroken over and over. During his long convalescence, Inigo occupied his mind by reading romantic epics of war and chivalry and love. After reading all the books in the castle, he asked someone to find him more reading material. And his mother-in-law, who was a faithful Catholic woman, brought him books about the life of Jesus and the lives of the saints. Inigo was, of course, disappointed, but he wanted to read something. So he read the books that his mother-in-law had found for him. In doing so, he made a discovery. He noticed that, depending on what he read, his mood, his spirit, was different. And not in the way that he would have expected. When he read the chivalric epics, he found himself depressed and disillusioned by his current situation. However, when he read the lives of the saints, he was encouraged and hopeful. Inigo labeled these two outcomes desolación y consolación, desolation and consolation. Inigo began to look at all of his life experiences to determine whether they led him to consolation or desolation. Through this practice, he realized that he no longer wanted to be a soldier knight, but rather he would devote his life to service up to God and to educating his fellow humans. He stopped the painful, repeated medical procedures and accepted his leg length discrepancy and the limp that it caused. And he began to share with his loved ones this practice of discernment that was pointing him to a life of ever greater peace. Together with a small group of his companions, he formed a religious order, which we know today as the Society of Jesus, better known as the Jesuits. And we have come to know Inigo as Saint Ignatius of Loyola. This discernment practice was formalized. It is known as the examination of conscience, or more commonly, the examen from the Spanish. Jesuits continue to use it and to teach it, and I learned it from them when I was at Marquette University in Milwaukee. My personal theology and spirituality are not Catholic, but this practice continues to serve me well. Each evening, I ground and center myself, and in that meditative state, I go back through the events of my day. As I do this, I ask myself, was this activity life-giving or life-depleting? Did it provide consolation or desolation? And this is not just an intellectual exercise. The practice of visualization puts me back into those experiences. It gives me the opportunity to pay close attention to what was moving in my spirit, what happened in my mind, and what sensations did I feel in my body. All of these different sources of wisdom point to the life-giving or life-depleting nature of the experience. The next step is to honor the life-giving aspects of my day by cultivating gratitude, recognizing the blessing that people and experiences have brought into my life. And for the life-depleting pieces, I invite healing and understanding. The final part of the examen is to discern right action going forward. I consider the patterns of behavior that serve me and the values and commitments that I hold, and those that would be better weeded out. How can I build more of these life-giving actions and relationships into my daily experience? How can I change my life to minimize the life-depleting things that I participate in? Do I need to take action to repair any of my relationships? Ignatius went on to create more detailed and complex spiritual practices, which are the foundation of what is today known as Ignatian spirituality. But the examen continues to hold a central place. During the Council of Trent in the mid-1500s, his disciples came to him to explain that they simply did not have enough time to do all the practices and participate in the conference. Ignatius conceded, but insisted that they not give up the examen. Some part of him was still a soldier, and he assured them that daily practice of the examen would open for each of them their sealed marching orders from God. From Ignatius' perspective, the examen was a tool by which a person could discern their calling in life, their vocation. That was certainly the case for me. On Monday, the leaders of the Jesuit Conference of Canada and the United States announced that they would raise $100 million to pay reparations to the descendants of enslaved people that the order had owned and sold in North America, with the ultimate goal that $1 billion would eventually be paid. This is the action that their collective, prayerful discernment has led them to take. In the words of Reverend Timothy Kasicki, president of the conference, racism will endure in America if we continue to turn our heads away from the truth of the past and how it affects us all today. The lasting effects of slavery call each of us to the work of truth and reconciliation. Without this joining of hearts and hands in true unity, the cycle of hatred and inequality in America will never end. Within Unitarian Universalism, we are also being challenged to take action to dismantle racial oppression as individuals and as an institution. As a part of this work, Black Lives of UU Organizing Collective has proposed that an 8th principle be added to our existing 7 principles. Here is the language they are encouraging all congregations to adopt. We, the member congregations of the Unitarian Universalist Association, covenant to affirm and promote journeying toward spiritual wholeness by working to build a diverse, multicultural, beloved community by our actions that accountably dismantle racism and other oppression in ourselves and our institutions. A group of our membership here at the North Shore Unitarian Church has asked us as a congregation to consider ratifying this new 8th principle. We will have the opportunity to learn more about it in the weeks to come. We will have conversations about its potential challenge and impact, and ultimately, we will vote on it. In a spiritual community, we do not make our choices simply by making charts or graphs or a list of pros and cons. We explore together, learning the facts and listening to the ideas and opinions of one another. We each, as individuals, are responsible for spending time in practices of discernment. And then we choose how to move forward together to best serve the spirit of life and the mission of this church. I pray blessings on all that you choose to plant this growing season in the earth, in your hearts, and in our community. May life thrive and flourish through our actions. Amen, and blessed be.
Holy
if you found something of value here today, please share the link with family and friends. I hope to see many of you in our virtual coffee hour, which will start in just a few minutes. You can find the Zoom link in this week's newsletter or in the chat. But first, by way of closing, I offer these words by Andrew Pakula. May you know fully and deeply the blessings of each of your heart's seasons, the inward turning of winter, spring's lush renewal, the effortless steady growth of summer, and autumn's rich harvest. May your passage from season to season be blessed, eased by hands to hold and by the light of love to guide you on. Gentle people, go in peace. Amen.